Hi, entrepreneur. Welcome to your Entrepreneur Resources Show. I'm super excited that you're here with me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Venice, your host, and here at your Entrepreneur Resource, we're the no-fluff action steps to help you avoid all the overwhelm and all the BS out there, connecting you with the right mentors, resources, and tools, helping you every step of the way on your entrepreneurial journey. We go live here twice a week, interviewing different entrepreneurs and experts on all areas of business. So make sure to join our Facebook group and look out for the events inside your Entrepreneur Resources page. You can find all the links in the description box. So today I have a very special guest with me. It is Sterling Schuyler. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Yay! So if you don't know who Sterling is, you need to. So after working 10 years in sales and marketing, Sterling has launched her career as a content and copywriter for emerging fund managers. From cold emails to content creation and from networking to pitching, she's passionate about helping underestimated entrepreneurs thrive. So in this interview with Sterling, we'll be talking about some of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make when writing about themselves and their businesses and how they can improve their copy with just a few small but significant changes. I really love this topic and I'm super honored to have you here with me today. But before we get started, I would love for you to share more about your business and your journey with us.
Sure, absolutely. As Venice said, I have spent 10 years in sales and marketing, but like most entrepreneurs, my career path has not been linear. I've worked in food manufacturing, stuffed animal manufacturing, community management, and I've worked in multiple countries. I'm American, and I've worked in the States, I've worked in Germany, and now I work in the Netherlands as a freelance copywriter. And it's been a journey. I had never heard of copywriting or copywriters as a career choice until I started freelancing. And I actually started freelancing as a marketing consultant. But what I found was that people were really interested in my writing skills and having me write blogs, write articles, write content for their websites, even write their emails. And I found that it's what I enjoyed the most, what I found the most purpose in, and also what I found most challenging. So I decided to niche down and focus on copywriting, and that's where I am today.
I love that. It's so true that no one is born into being an entrepreneur, and no one is born knowing exactly what they will be doing like 10 years, 20 years down the road. So I love your journey. It's really interesting because you brought up content, you brought up, email writing and copywriting. Why is copywriting so important, and why is it the one that you decided to go with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I started focusing on copywriting partly because that's what other people kept calling me, or what they kept calling the services. I have since explored a bit more into content creation, but overall, whether it's copywriting or content writing, you need to communicate an idea, and you need to communicate it persuasively and easily. And especially when there's so much content out there that people are going through, whether it's their emails, articles, social media posts, white papers, everyone is so overwhelmed by the amount of content that they consume. And so having well-written copy is crucial for getting your message across and ultimately closing a sale, making a connection, scheduling a meeting, securing investing, whatever it is. It usually starts with written word.
Yeah, definitely. Do you mind telling us just a little bit about the difference between copywriting and content writing? Because I know there are entrepreneurs that's listening is probably like, okay, so really, what's the difference? We know there are two. What are the difference between the two?
So copywriting is more about the sale. So you'll usually see people talk about copywriting when it comes to writing a landing page or writing your sales page or an email marketing sequence. content writing is more about the education. So it could be a blog. It could also still be a website or a newsletter sequence. It's just that the purpose of each one is a little bit different. Copywriting is more about making the sale. Content writing is more about the education.
Absolutely, yeah. So copywriting would be, your website, I guess, and like all the tiny little things that you don't. I guess like content writing for me is like blog posts, right? It's just like long form content, and copywriting is more like you have to really look into every single sentence and make sure that they convey and kind of convert people. So let's dive into the biggest mistakes since we're talking about copywriting, and all the different things that entrepreneurs do when it comes to copies. What are some biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make when it comes to copywriting?
The biggest mistake I see is that people stick to a really academic tone of voice. And I think that stems a lot from the way that we're trained to write, like in school, that you're told not to write the way that you speak, that you should use kind of like these convoluted, complicated sentence structures that make you sound super smart, and that you should never start a sentence with a conjunction like and or but or. But like I was saying earlier, we don't really have time, or we don't have the patience to read something that's written that way. I don't know a lot of people that read academic papers for fun. Yeah, I would say the biggest mistake is using a formal tone of voice for a website or a blog post or anything really that's being published online. And it's a really, really difficult habit to break, because, again, that's just what we've been trained to do when we were learning how to write. And then once we graduated and entered the world and either left the corporate world or left academia to start our own businesses, we still find ourselves writing in that pattern. And similarly to that kind of stiff tone of voice, people get really caught up in using jargon and fancy buzzwords. For example, I see the word optimize a lot, which is a great word, but sometimes it's like, are we trying to optimize stress relief? Like, is that really what we want to communicate about a solution to help people relax? So things like that, I would say those are probably the two biggest mistakes: is using jargon that isn't really useful, and using a tone of voice that isn't accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's hard too because you want to be friendly, but you don't want to be too friendly, right? There's just that fine line. Do you have any suggestions when it comes to words, like specific words that you think can really trigger people to stay and read your copy?
It really depends on what it is that you're writing about, of course. But you'll see this, for example, when you're searching for things online, like using words like "how to" or "7 tips." Things, again, they communicate a really clear answer to a question. And then there are all kinds of lists out there of different emotional words like "best" or things that have to do with money. Numbers are always really big, or like really popular, and help people really understand what it is they're getting into when they look at your copy. I think something else that's really helpful to think about when you're at least starting to write something is to think about how you would ask the question about the problem, because that's how we search for things. Whether we're asking Siri or Google or typing it into a search engine, that's how we're looking for answers and how we're looking for solutions. So I would recommend that entrepreneurs start with those types of words, that type of phrasing, to help at least generate that interest and curiosity into what you have to offer.
Yeah. So it's basically like putting yourself in your audience shoes, right? Like thinking about how they would
Absolutely.
ask those questions and answer the questions with how, like answer those questions just like how they would ask the questions, I guess. So yeah,
Exactly.
100. Yeah, for sure. And I know that you talked about you talked a little bit about writing about yourself, right? Like how entrepreneurs make mistakes when it comes to writing about yourself. And I feel like this is a huge one because everyone knows about page. Everyone knows that it's important and everyone should have that on your website, but it's hard to stand out. Like how do you capture people's attention, right? So any kind of tips or any kind of advice you have for us when it comes to the writing about ourselves?
um, I would actually, not that I'm totally trying to convince anyone to hire a copywriter, but I would recommend hiring a copywriter for that. And the reason is because it's so difficult to write about ourselves. I've actually, as a copywriter, have hired someone else to to write some information about me, different posts and profiles. And just as the most recent example, someone wrote about how I can help, how I help people make a profit, or I can't remember exactly what the phrase was, but when I was initially looking at this description of me that someone else had written, I thought, I would never say that about myself. But then I realized, like, I would never say that about myself. We, especially with female entrepreneurs, we tend to not to overlook ourselves or discount, well, yeah, a bit, that we discount ourselves, that we aren't as willing to talk about ourselves in such a shining light. And so that's a reason to hire, a really good reason, I would say, to hire a copywriter to write your about page, to write your bio, because ultimately you want an outsider's perspective to tell your story, because you're going to have outsiders looking at your story. The things you might highlight about yourself are things that no one really cares about, potentially. Whereas if you have someone else writing your story and writing about you, they're going to highlight things that they find special about you, or the things that you're not willing to say about yourself.
No, I actually never really thought about it. I've never hired a copywriter myself, but do you have any tips for us if someone listening right now is thinking, I might be interested in hiring a copywriter? Like, how do you know who to hire? Because I know there's so many copywriters out there. Like, how do you know, find the right person? Any tips you have for us when it comes to hiring somebody?
Sure. As you mentioned before, I'm a writer for emerging fund managers. And so if you are a coach, you probably won't want to hire me, because that's just not my specialty. I think that that's something that a lot of, I think even with all professions, that's something that we kind of miss sometimes. For example, when people say, oh, I need a logo, and they just want to hire a graphic designer, but not all graphic designers do logos. So I would say, if you are looking for a copywriter, look for one that is familiar with your niche, familiar with not just your industry, but with your target audience. Because that's the other huge key factor of it, is that it's not just that they need to understand you as a person, whether you're a business coach or a financial advisor. They also need to understand who your audience is, so that they know how to write, so that they can help you convert your audience.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really important, not just for copywriters, but for anyone that you hire into your company, right? That you have to make sure that your values align. You have to make sure that they know your industry. Like you can't, I mean, really depends. But I feel like if it's a copywriter, someone's going to be basically stepping into your shoes and talking to your audience directly. They need to know your audience.
Yeah. And that's actually another, going back to tone of voice,
Mhm.
because that's something that I think about a lot, but my clients don't even think about that. And so, for example, looking at Instagram. You just using a totally different type of profession, but I promise it relates. When you look at an Instagram feed, you may love someone's aesthetic. You may love the colors that they use, the filters that they use, the types of photos that they're taking, and you may want to hire them as your social media manager or your content creator. But you can love someone's aesthetic and style, but it may not actually fit yours or your business's. And so taking that back to copywriting, you may love the words that someone writes or the style that they write in, but if it doesn't actually match the voice of the business that you're running, then you're going to have a hard time. For example, going back to this idea of academic writing versus a really casual type of writing or tone of voice. If you are running like a SaaS company, you may not want to be, you may be a super snarky brand, but is that voice going to translate to your audience? Are they also going to appreciate your snarkiness? So things like that to keep in mind is that you may love someone's tone of voice and their style of writing, but if it doesn't fit your business, it's just not gonna work.
Yeah, definitely. And it comes down to also putting yourself in your audience shoes again. Like, what would they like? What would they resonate with, right? What would they like stop and be like, oh my gosh, I can relate with this brand. So that's definitely important. Any other tips you have for us when it comes to website copies? Because I know that websites are complicated. Homepage, especially. Like, what do we put in the header? You know, we probably all change 100 times, going back and forth between different copies for those. Any tips you have for those?
Well, to start, I would say that the point that you brought up, that, you know, everyone has changed their headers 100 times and changed their hero statement and just little things like that. Know that every entrepreneur does that. You are not alone in feeling like, oh, my website isn't perfect. I have never met anyone who has been like, oh yeah, I love everything about my website. I will not change it for a year. Like, nobody does that. But that being said, what I would recommend for if you're writing your own copy for your website, whether it's your homepage or your about page, your services page, just be really clear. Don't use words or jargon that your audience wouldn't use or wouldn't understand. We may be really tempted to be super clever in our wording, but ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're not clearly communicating your message, it doesn't really matter how clever you are. You need to make sure that everything is, just super easy to understand, because again, our attention spans are pretty short. So when we're scrolling through a website, we want to be really clear on what is the problem you solve, who do you solve it for, and how do you solve it. And so when you're scrolling, you should be able to answer those questions pretty easily and quickly. And also being really clear in your call to actions.
I think call to action is definitely a huge one, especially when it comes to copy, because there's copy in the call to action too, right? Like the final step to to truly click on that button and bring them to, convert them to do something. Any tips on, like the button, the text on the button or the copy on the button?
I've always seen the best results with things that, again, are really clear about what the button is going to do. For example, let's say if you have this copy about, being a coach, wanting to help them improve their own business or their own performance. Like if your button says, "Let's dance." Like, what does that mean? Am I gonna make an appointment with you? Is this gonna make me pay for something? Like, what is this next page? It's as opposed to just like learn more or book a call. Things like that, again, is you might be super clever and it's super fun, but if it's not clear how your client or how your lead or your prospect, if it's not clear what they're supposed to do, how they're supposed to take action in order to do what you want them to do, then you're going to have a hard time.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sometimes I see call to action buttons that are just so vague. I don't want to click on that button because I feel like you're going to take me to a spam page or some random page I didn't sign up for. I have no clue where you're taking me. So I agree.
Right.
I really like those buttons where it kind of make it like kind of personalize it a little bit. So for example, if it's like a freebie opt-in, it would say, oh, I want that ebook or something as the button. And it's so clear. It's so direct. I'm like, yes, I want to click on that button because I know exactly what's going to happen. Yeah. That's super important. So you talked about, the tone of voice, don't use jargons, be very clear, this call to action buttons. Any other like tweaks that people can just make today to make their website or like their copies more convertible, like can convert their audience better? Any other tips you might have for us?
Yeah. I would say if you are struggling with your tone of voice, trying to figure out how to relax and potentially how to sound more like yourself in your writing, I would recommend envisioning your writing or writing your draft as if you're giving a TED Talk. And what I mean by that is like when you watch a TED Talk, they could be talking about all kinds of concepts, and some of which can be really complicated and dense or just really difficult to understand. But they talk about it in a way that's really entertaining, that still feels like a personal conversation, and it's accessible. It's easy to understand, and you want to keep listening and learning more. So that's been the recommendation I've given a lot of people, and when I say that, they're like, oh, that it's still clever, it's still smart and entertaining and authoritative, right? That's the other thing that we want to do is communicate the fact that we are knowledgeable in our field. But you can still write about it casually, and still, in a way, if you can write about really complicated concepts in a really easy to understand and accessible manner, then people will be like, oh yeah, she really knows her stuff, because she doesn't have to use all these big words that make me feel isolated. She can explain it in a way that I can understand. So again, like try to think of your writing as a TED Talk. How would you present yourself and this information to an audience who may or may not be familiar with your topic?
I really love this because I feel like it's, TED Talks. It's such a great tip. I'm actually, my brain is like, like I'm soaking this in because I think just like what you said with the TED Talk, it is captivating, but at the same time, it's simple. It's kind of funny depending on the TED Talk, but it's you. People really personalize it. But it's easy to understand. It's educational, and people walk away thinking, "Wow, I really learned something." And that's kind of what you want your audience to walk away feeling like, right? Like you want them to feel like this is someone I want to work with, or this is, like the next copy, the freebie that she has or something. I want to download it. That's great. What about the length of the copy? Like, do you have any tips regarding like how long? Because I know people are probably like paragraphs or short sentences. It's difficult.
Absolutely. I would say in terms of length, it really depends on what it is you're writing. For example, for something like a blog post, they usually recommend anywhere between 300 and 1,000 words, like a minimum of 300. But to do that on like your about page, like 1,000 words on your about page might be a little excessive. But for something like a sales page or a landing page, you may need up to 3,000 words. So it really does depend on the material itself. However, I do recommend, like you mentioned, using short sentences, paragraphs that are also really short, because, when you're like a lot of people are using their mobile phones or tablets when they're looking at online materials, and it's kind of difficult to read through a wall of text. Having that space between paragraphs is really helpful, and easier to read, easier to skim. So you may feel like this paragraph is only 2 sentences or just 1 sentence, but it does make it easier to read. For example, if you look at Neil Patel's website, all of his blogs, almost every paragraph is 1 sentence, but it makes it a lot easier to read on mobile. Yeah. But his blogs are also like 5,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and a lot of images, a lot of graphs, a lot of infographics, which is also great because it breaks up, like, so you're not stuck on just reading text. It's like, you get some graphics, you get some imageries.
Yeah. Another really helpful tip, especially if you want to show up in search engine results, is using images and making sure that you add the alt text to it. It does 2 things. First, it helps make your content more accessible for people who may have hard of sight or use like screen readers. And then the second thing is that search engines like that. It's one of those things that a search engine will look for, is whether or not you, first of all, have images, and second, whether your images have the alt text that supports the search query.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's such an important SEO tip. And I think a lot of the time people don't think about it because, like, alt text is just there. And then once you've had, 10, 20, 30 blogs, it's kind of annoying to have to go back and add all the alt text. But trust me, it won't take you too long. Worst case scenario, hire a VA to help you out with that. It would really significantly boost your SEO. So that's actually such a great tip. Thank you so much. I know, like, you probably have a lot more tips up your sleeve, but we do have to start wrapping up. But would you like to share more about the special gift you have for us?
Of course. If you are looking for more tips about how to improve your own writing, I do have a newsletter called the Lean Copywriting Newsletter, and I send emails every few days. And it's for everything from helping you write faster, helping you write better, also helping you write like cold emails, how to communicate your message in a more succinct and efficient and accessible way. All that is just in my newsletter, so you can just get all those tips, and you don't have to be an emerging fund manager to get the benefits from that newsletter.
Perfect. So before I let you go, do you mind sharing where people can connect with you and find?
Yeah, absolutely. I am mostly active on Twitter, and you can find me at Schuyler. And then you can also find me on Instagram at sterling.schuyler. And those are the 2 places where you can just reach out, say hi, and yeah.
And your website as well.
Oh, yeah, my website, sterlingschuyler.com, where I'm, constantly tweaking and changing things.
Awesome. No, like, check out Sterling's website. It's amazing. I've been there multiple times. And thank you again so much for being on your Entrepreneur Resources show. All the tips, all the strategies. I love all these different action steps and everything. So for entrepreneurs that's listening, in case you want to get a summary of the interview, make sure to check out our show notes, which I'll link in the description box. We have our live interviews with experts here twice a week, so make sure to stay tuned and join our community on Facebook, again in the description box. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I'll chat with you very soon, and have a